12-year-old Ben was bursting with excitement as the family van rolled into the gravel parking lot of Camp Oak Shadow. For weeks, he had been counting down the days until summer camp. The glossy brochures showed kids kayaking, roasting marshmallows, and hiking through dense, sunlit forests. It looked like a dream come true for someone like Ben, who had never been away from home before. His parents gave him a quick hug goodbye. "Have fun, champ," his dad said, ruffling Ben's hair. His mom handed him a neatly packed duffel bag. "Take pictures and make memories," she added, smiling warmly. As the van disappeared down the dirt road, Ben joined the other campers, his heart racing with anticipation. Camp life was everything Ben hoped it would be at first. Days were filled with laughter, canoe races on the lake, arts and crafts, and campfire songs. The counselors, all in their late teens or early 20s, were friendly and full of energy. His favorite was Logan, a counselor with a booming laugh who always made sure Ben's team won tug-of-war. But after the first week, Ben began noticing peculiar things. One night he woke up thirsty and decided to sneak out of his cabin for a drink of water. As he tiptoed across the moonlit campground, he heard faint chanting. Curious, he followed the sound to a clearing deep in the woods. What he saw froze him in place. The counselors stood in a circle, each wearing a dark hooded cloak. In the center of the circle was a crude stone altar, lit by flickering red candles. On the altar lay what looked like a carved wooden idol, twisted and grotesque with hollow eyes that seemed to follow Ben even from his hiding spot. The chanting grew louder, more intense, as the counselors swayed in unison. Terrified, Ben backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. He barely made it back to his cabin without tripping over tree roots. Once under his blanket, he lay wide awake until dawn, trying to convince himself it was just a weird camp tradition he didn't understand. The next morning, breakfast felt different. Logan, who always joked with him, greeted him with a lingering stare instead. The other counselors whispered to each other as Ben passed, their smiles tight and forced. At Arts and Crafts, one of them placed a hand on his shoulder and said with a too-wide grin, "We all have our roles to play, don't we, Ben?" The words sent a chill down his spine. He tried to tell a few fellow campers what he had seen, but they either laughed it off or told him he was imagining things. "You're just homesick," one of them said. "This place gets spooky at night." By lunchtime, Ben decided he had to get out of there. That evening he asked the camp director, a stern woman named Mrs. Holloway, if he could call his parents. "Not feeling well," he mumbled. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Ben. I'll make sure they know." The next day, his parents arrived, much to his relief. He practically jumped into the van, eager to leave Camp Oak Shadow far behind. "Thanks for coming," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think this place just isn't for me." His mom turned in her seat and gave him a reassuring smile. "It's okay, sweetie. We'll take care of everything." The ride started off normal, but as the familiar roads of home gave way to unfamiliar ones, Ben began to feel uneasy. The woods outside grew thicker, the light dimmer. Dad, where are we going?" he asked. "Just a little detour," his dad replied, his voice calm but distant. The van eventually pulled up to a dilapidated building at the edge of a dense forest. Its windows were boarded up, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. Ben's stomach knotted. "Why are we here?" he asked, his voice trembling. His mom turned to him, her face strangely serene. "We're so proud of you, Ben," she said softly. "You've been chosen." His parents led him inside, despite his protests. The interior was cold and damp, lit only by candles lining the walls. The same twisted idol he had seen in the woods stood on a pedestal at the far end of the room, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Standing in a circle around the idol were the counselors from camp, their hoods now pushed back to reveal faces painted with eerie symbols. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward, her smile wider than ever. "Welcome, Ben," she said. "You've been chosen as our offering." Ben turned to his parents, his voice cracking. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" His father placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "It's an honor, son. You'll bring us closer to the eternal." Before Ben could run, the counselors closed in, chanting the same ominous phrases he had heard in the woods. His heart pounded as he struggled against the hands that grabbed him. Just as they began lifting him toward the altar, the building's door slammed open with a deafening bang. A blinding white light flooded the room, and a deep, booming voice shouted, "Stop!" The next few moments were a blur. Shadowy figures, rescuers or something else, stormed the room, breaking the circle. Chaos erupted as the counselors and his parents screamed in protest. Ben felt himself being pulled away from the madness, his legs barely able to move. The last thing he saw before blacking out was the idol, now glowing with an eerie red light, as if it were alive. When Ben woke up, he was in a hospital bed. A kind-looking nurse told him he had been found wandering the edge of the forest, confused and alone. "You're safe now," she said, patting his hand. But Ben wasn't sure. The hollow eyes of the idol haunted his dreams, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the cult and his parents weren't done with him yet.